My name is Michael. I'm 34 years old, and until recently, I believed my life was steady in the most ordinary way. I worked as a compliance analyst for a mid-sized financial firm in the city, the kind of job where you read the fine print no one else wants to read, the kind of job where you notice small inconsistencies before they become catastrophes. Most people who meet me don't remember much about me afterward. I'm not the loudest in the room. I don't dominate conversations. I don't correct people just to prove I'm right. I've always preferred to listen longer than I speak. That tendency has earned me certain labels over the years: easygoing, harmless, too nice, sometimes even soft. What people often confuse is quiet with weak. I grew up in a family where I was the steady one, the one who didn't make waves. My older sister was magnetic, impulsive, and emotional. She filled rooms effortlessly. I learned early that my role wasn't to compete with that energy. My role was to stabilize it, and I did for years. This story isn't about dramatic revenge. It's not about yelling or public humiliation or some cinematic showdown. It's about something far more uncomfortable: betrayal that unfolds quietly, the kind that doesn't explode, it erodes. 2 weeks before my wedding, debt collectors walked into the venue during a final payment meeting and asked for me by name. They weren't mistaken. They had documents, contracts, high interest personal loans, totaling more than $500,000. Loans taken out using my identification by my sister. By the time the truth surfaced, the damage had already traveled further than I understood. My fiancée, my wife-to-be, was shown a version of me I didn't even recognize. A secret fraudster, a man drowning in hidden debt, a man who had built a relationship on a lie. On our wedding day, she didn't walk down the aisle. She walked away. What followed wasn't chaos. It wasn't screaming. It wasn't some dramatic public defense. It was silent. Investigation, patience, and choices that cannot be undone. This is a story about being underestimated, about how long you can be invisible before you realize invisibility can be leveraged. It's about what happens when the person everyone assumes will absorb the damage decides not to. I won't pretend I handled everything perfectly. I won't paint myself as a hero, but I will tell you exactly what happened, how the loans were taken, how the truth was buried, and how I responded when I realized the role I'd been playing in my own life. If you've ever been the dependable one, the quiet one, the one people assume will just handle it, you might recognize parts of yourself here. Let me ask you something before we begin. Have you ever realized, a little too late, that the people closest to you never truly saw who you were? To understand what happened, you need to understand who I was to everyone involved. In my family, I was the safe one. My sister, Amanda, was 4 years older than me. Charismatic, social, the kind of a person who could walk into a room of strangers and leave with 3 new best friends and someone offering her a job. Growing up, teachers adored her. Relatives doted on her. When she made mistakes, and she made plenty, they were framed as passion, spirit, creativity. When I did well, it was expected. When I stayed out of the trouble, it was assumed. I wasn't resentful, not then. I genuinely believed stability was its own reward. I got good grades. I studied finance and compliance because I liked rules, not in a rigid way, but in a structural way. Rules meant predictability. Predictability meant safety. At 29, I bought my first condo. At 32, I was promoted to senior compliance analyst. My credit score hovered In the 800s, I paid off my car early. I kept meticulous digital folders for everything: insurance, taxes, contracts. People joked that I was boring responsible. I wore it like a badge. To Amanda, I was her fallback plan. If she overdrafted her account, I'd spot her. If she forgot to file something important, I'd help her sort it out. If she needed a reference, I'd write it. I never made her feel small about it. She'd hug me, call me her genius little brother, and promise she'd pay me back. Sometimes she did. Sometimes she didn't. Our parents leaned on me too, in quieter ways. If something needed explaining, mortgage, refinancing, tax forms, healthcare paperwork, I was the one who understood that stuff. They trusted me with details they didn't bother explaining to Amanda. She was emotional. I was in logistics. That dynamic followed us into adulthood without anyone consciously choosing it. When I met Claire, my fiancée, I thought I'd finally stepped out of that old role. Claire was thoughtful, driven, and warm without being loud. She admired that I was steady. She once told me, "You make me feel safe. You're like the ground under my feet." At the time, it felt like love. Looking back, I wonder if it was also a projection. To her friends, I was the solid guy, the reliable one, the adult in the room. When wedding planning got stressful, I handled vendor contracts and payment schedules. When there were budget decisions to make, I created spreadsheets no one asked for, but everyone used. I didn't mind. But here's the thing about being the dependable one. People stop checking whether you're carrying too much. They assume you can. No one ever asked if I felt pressure, being the financial anchor in my family. No one asked whether I worried about being the contingency plan. They saw calm and assumed capacity was infinite. Even Amanda, especially Amanda, she had moved between jobs over the years: marketing roles, event planning, and a short-lived boutique business. There were gaps in employment that I didn't question deeply. She'd always land on her feet, or so I believed. If I noticed small red flags, calls she stepped outside to take, mail sent to my parents' address even though she had her own apartment, I rationalized them. Everyone struggles sometimes, and I trusted her. I trusted that whatever chaos followed her around would never deliberately involve me. If you had asked anyone in my life to describe me a month before the wedding, they would have said, "Michael, he's steady, he's careful, he's the last person who would ever end up in financial trouble." That certainty, their certainty, would become the sharpest blade. Because when the debt collectors showed up, the narrative wrote itself before I could speak. The responsible one must have been hiding something. The quiet one must have secrets. And once people believe they finally see the flaw in the dependable man, they rarely pause to question it. What hurt most wasn't that strangers doubted me. It was how quickly the people who knew me adjusted their image, as if they'd only been waiting for proof that I wasn't who they thought. And maybe that was my first real mistake. I let everyone define me as reliable, but I never defined the boundaries of that reliability. The first sign that something was wrong didn't look like a disaster. It looked like a clerical error. About 3 months before the wedding, I received a notification from my credit monitoring app. Nothing dramatic, just a soft alert. New inquiry added to your report. I almost ignored it. In my line of work, I understood that inquiries could happen for mundane reasons: pre-approved offers, mistaken pulls, system glitches. Still, habit made me open the report. The lender's name wasn't one I recognized. High interest, personal financing. Amount requested, $75,000. Status, approved. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. I hadn't applied for anything. I didn't need to. I had no reason to. My first reaction wasn't panic. It was logical. There must be some administrative overlap, identity mix-up, maybe fraud, but random fraud, not personal. I called the lender directly. They verified my name, my social security number, and my date of birth. All correct. The address on file, though, was slightly off. It listed my parents' home address instead of my condo. That detail lodged somewhere uncomfortable in my chest. I told the representative I had not authorized any loan. She sounded sympathetic, but cautious. Sir, we have a signed digital agreement. We also have identification documents uploaded to the portal. Identification documents. I asked for copies. They said it would take a few business days to process the request. I hung up and sat at my kitchen table, phone still in my hand. I didn't call Claire. I didn't call my parents. And I definitely didn't call Amanda. Not yet. Instead, I did what I always do. I gathered data. I pulled my full credit report. That's when I saw it. Not one loan. 3, all opened within the past 8 months. Different lenders, similar amounts. All high interest, short-term structures. The kind designed to trap someone in compounding payments. Total exposure, just over $480,000. The room didn't spin. My heart didn't race. I wish it had. Physical panic would have been easier to process than what I actually felt. It was disorientation, like realizing a door in your house has been unlocked for months and you never noticed. I reviewed my bank accounts. No incoming deposits match those loan amounts, which meant if money had been disbursed, it wasn't to me. Then I noticed something else. 2-factor authentication alerts on an older email address I barely use anymore. An address I had once logged into at my parents' house years ago. An address Amanda had helped me recover when I'd forgotten the password once. That was the first small cut. Not proof, not an accusation, just a memory sliding into place in a way that made my stomach tighten. I drove to my parents' house that evening under the pretense of dropping off wedding invitation samples. Amanda's car was in the driveway. She was at the kitchen table, laughing with my mom over something on her phone. She looked up when I walked in, smiled easily. "Hey, genius, come admire these centerpiece ideas." There was nothing in her expression, no visible guilt, no tension. If she had done something, if she wore it flawlessly, I almost asked her directly, but something stopped me. Maybe it was denial. Maybe it was instinct. But I didn't confront her that night. I watched instead. I noticed how quickly she closed her laptop when I stepped near it, how she deflected when I mentioned finances casually in conversation. Tiny things. Individually meaningless. Together. Uncomfortable. When I left, my mom hugged me and said, "You and your sister have always balanced each other so well." Balanced. The word lingered. On the drive home, I realized something unsettling. If this was fraud, and if it was someone close to me, the damage wasn't just financial. It was narrative. If lenders believed I'd taken these loans and defaulted, if collections escalated publicly, if legal notices arrived, who would people believe? The sister who lived loudly and emotionally? Or the quiet man who suddenly looked like he'd been hiding $500,000 in debt? That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't tell Claire. But something had shifted. Trust had developed a hairline fracture. And hairline fractures, if ignored, become structural failures. I didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. When something feels too heavy to face directly, the mind does something clever. It minimizes. The morning after I saw the loans, I told myself a story that felt easier than the truth. Maybe Amanda had used my information temporarily. Maybe she intended to tell me. Maybe she was in trouble and didn't know how to ask for help. Maybe this was a misunderstanding. that would resolve quietly if I just gathered enough documentation. I framed it as problem solving, not betrayal. That was my pattern. When something hurt, I converted it into logistics. Over the next few weeks, more letters started arriving, not to my condo, to my parents' house. Formal envelopes with my name printed in bold. Official font. Past due. Urgent. Final notice. My mother mentioned it casually over the phone. Michael, honey, some bank keeps sending scary-looking letters here. I told Amanda to put them aside for you. I asked, carefully. Amanda's been handling the mail. Oh, just organizing it, she said. You know how she is. Always trying to help. Always trying to help. I drove over that evening and asked Amanda if I could see the letters. She handed them to me without hesitation, too easily. You're not in trouble, are you? She asked, lightly, leaning against the counter. There it was, not concerned, suspicion disguised as humor. I watched her face when she said it, searching for something. Guilt, fear, a crack. She held eye contact. Calm, curious. I said, no, just sorting something out. She shrugged. Good. You'd tell us if you were drowning, right? The words were simple, but something about the phrasing lodged in me. If you were drowning, the assumption had already begun. Over the next month, I noticed subtle shifts. Amanda is making small comments in front of our parents. Michael works so hard. Sometimes I worry he burns out. He's so private about his stress. Finance people always have secrets, right? She laughed when she said it. So did my dad. I told myself I was being paranoid. But repetition does something powerful. It plants seeds. At a family dinner, Claire joined us. The wedding was 6 weeks away. Amanda raised a glass and said, "To Claire, brave woman marrying the most mysterious man in the room." Everyone laughed. Claire squeezed my hand under the table. "He's not mysterious," she said. "He's just thoughtful." Amanda tilted her head. "You sure about that?" Again, laughter. Small cut. Small cut. Small cut. Individually harmless. Collectively corrosive. I could have confronted her then. I could have said, "What exactly are you implying?" But I didn't. Why? Because I didn't want to seem defensive. Because I didn't want to accuse her without irrefutable proof. Because part of me still hoped I was wrong. So I normalized it. I told myself that siblings tease each other. I told myself wedding stress makes people weird. I told myself Amanda had always been dramatic. It didn't mean anything. Meanwhile, the balances on those loans continued to accrue interest. I began formally disputing them, filing identity theft reports, documenting every call, every envelope, every digital timestamp. Quietly, no announcements, no family meetings. But the emotional tone around me kept shifting. Claire started asking gentle questions. "Are you okay? You've been distant." "I'm just busy," I said. Technically true, but incomplete. What I didn't realize then was that silence doesn't just protect you. It creates space for other people to write their own version of events. And Amanda was writing hers. I later learned she had confided in Claire privately. "Michael won't tell you everything," she'd said. "He hates looking imperfect," planting doubt under the guise of concern. I had spent my entire life being the reliable one, but reliability without boundaries turns into an assumption, and an assumption repeated enough times becomes belief. By the time the wedding invitations were mailed, there were two parallel narratives forming. Mine, careful, documented, methodical, and hers, subtle, emotional, suggestive. And the worst part? I was still giving her the benefit of the doubt, because I couldn't yet accept that disrespect had evolved into something deliberate. There's a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when you realize you're not being seen as a person anymore. You're being seen as a function. For most of my life, I was the function. In my family, I was stability. In my relationship, I was secure. In my career, I was risk mitigation. I wasn't the emotional center. I wasn't the unpredictable one. I was the constant. And constants aren't questioned, they're used. The realization didn't come in a dramatic flash. It came during something painfully ordinary. A Sunday brunch at my parents' house. Claire was there. Amanda was there. My parents were debating floral arrangements for the wedding, even though that decision had already been made. Amanda was scrolling through her phone, half engaged, occasionally chiming in with strong opinions about things she hadn't helped plan. At one point, my dad turned to me and said, "You've got the finances covered, though, right? No surprises." The phrasing was casual, but it landed differently now. No surprises. Before I could answer, Amanda laughed softly. Unless he's secretly living a double life. There it was again. That suggestion. Light, playful, repeated. This time, I didn't look at her. I looked at Claire. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was the smallest thing, a flicker, a hesitation before she squeezed my hand. That was when it crystallized. Amanda wasn't just planting jokes. She was assigning me a role. The secretive man, the overly private one, the responsible guy who may have had something to hide. And I was participating in it by staying calm, by brushing it off, by refusing to confront her publicly. I was reinforcing the idea that I was above it, or worse, guilty and composed. After brunch, Claire and I sat in my car before driving home. She stared out the window for a long moment before speaking. "Is there anything you haven't told me?" she asked gently. It wasn't accusatory. It was almost apologetic. That hurt more. I could have unloaded everything right then. The disputed loans, the suspicions, the documentation. But something stopped me. Pride? Maybe. Or maybe it was this. I didn't want to sound like I was blaming my sister without courtroom level proof. So I said, "No, I'm handling something administrative. It's under control." Under control. The phrase felt safe. It also created distance. Over the next few weeks, I noticed how often people defaulted to me when anything went wrong. Vendor overbooked? Michael will fix it. Guest list conflict? Michael will smooth it over. Payment confusion? Michael has spreadsheets. But when Amanda was late to planning meetings or changed her RSVP for pre-wedding events at the last minute, no one held her accountable. She's just stressed. She's always been like that. That's Amanda. The roles were fixed. She was allowed to be chaotic. I was required to be composed. And here's the dangerous part about assigned roles. Once people believe you're the stable one, they assume you can absorb instability indefinitely. I started reviewing old memories through a different lens. Amanda borrowed money and forgot repayment. Times she used my name to get better insurance quotes because you have a better profile. At times, she joked that if she ever needed a clean slate, she'd just become Michael for a year. I had laughed then because I thought she was exaggerating. Now, those jokes felt like a rehearsal. The more I documented the loans, the more I understood the level of access required. Personal details, security questions, archived tax forms, information that only someone close would know. And still, I said nothing publicly because I was playing my role. Reliable, rational, non-confrontational. But something inside me had begun to separate. Externally, I was still the steady groom. Internally, I was mapping patterns. The role they assigned me was the man who will endure quietly. What they didn't realize was that quiet endurance and quiet observation look identical from the outside, but they lead to very different outcomes. The shift didn't happen during an argument. It didn't happen when another letter arrived. It didn't even happen when I confirmed through digital IP logs that two of the loan applications had been submitted from my parents' home network. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, alone in my office. I had requested full documentation from one of the lenders, timestamps, device fingerprints, and uploaded identification files. Most companies hesitate to release that information without a police report, but my professional background helped. I knew how to phrase the request. I knew what departments to escalate to. I knew how to sound like someone who understood regulatory liability. When the files arrived, I opened them methodically, scanned copy of my driver's license. My social security number is typed correctly, electronic signature. Then I saw the supporting document attached to verify income. It wasn't a fake pay stub. It was one of my real tax returns. A return I had stored digitally years ago. A return I had once printed at my parents' house when their printer was working better than mine. I stared at the PDF for a long time. That wasn't random identity theft. That wasn't a data breach from some anonymous hacker. That was proximity. And in that moment, something inside me stopped hoping. Up until then, I had been operating in maybe. Maybe there's an explanation. Maybe I'm misreading this. Maybe Amanda will come to me before this explodes. But seeing that document, something personal, something handled in a shared space years ago, collapsed the last layer of denial. I didn't feel rage. I expected rage. Instead, I felt clarity. Not about what she had done. I already knew that. Clarity about what I had been doing. I had been protecting her. Even in my own thoughts, I had softened the accusation. I had framed it as desperation, as temporary borrowing, as something that could be resolved quietly. But the scale of the loans told a different story. This wasn't a moment of panic. It was a system, multiple lenders, staggered application dates. Payments are made just long enough to avoid immediate detection before stopping entirely. It was strategic. And the most unsettling realization wasn't that my sister had used my identity. It was that she had assumed I would absorb the consequences, that if things collapsed, I would clean it up, like always. That afternoon, I closed my office door and leaned back in my chair. I replayed every joke she had made, every subtle comment about secrets, every planted doubt in front of Claire. It wasn't random. It was insulation. If suspicion ever turned toward me, she was already shaping the narrative, and I had been helping her by staying silent. That was the shift, not from love to hate, but from denial to acceptance. Amanda wasn't confused. She wasn't overwhelmed. She was calculating. And Claire didn't know what to believe. Because I hadn't given her the full picture. I had tried to protect everyone from discomfort. But protection without transparency becomes vulnerability. I didn't call Amanda that day. I didn't confront her. Instead, I created a new folder on my encrypted drive. Title: Full Timeline. I began documenting everything chronologically. Loan origination dates, IP logs, mail patterns, conversations, offhand remarks. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I understood something fundamental now. If this came to light publicly, emotion would not save me. Only evidence would. For the first time in my life, my silence wasn't about keeping the peace. It was about preparation. And once that decision settled in, I felt something I hadn't felt since the first credit alert appeared. Not fear. Control. After that Tuesday, my silence changed. Before, it had been instinctive, automatic, the lifelong reflex of someone who avoids escalation. Now, it was deliberate. I stopped reacting to Amanda's jokes entirely. No defensive smiles, no polite eye rolls, just a neutral acknowledgement, as if she were commenting on the weather. It unsettled her. I could see it in the way her eyes lingered a second longer, searching for friction that never came. At a small pre-wedding dinner with friends, she made another one of her light-hearted remarks. If Michael disappears to the Cayman Islands after this wedding, at least we'll know why. A few people laughed. I took a sip of water and asked, calmly, why would I go to the Cayman Islands? Not confrontational, just curious. She blinked. You know, finance guy joke? I don't, I said. Silence settled briefly over the table. The joke dissolved without oxygen. That was new. Claire watched the exchange closely. On the drive home, she said, "You've been different lately." "How?" I asked. Quieter, but not distant, just observant. She wasn't wrong. I was observing everything now. Who asked questions? Who repeated Amanda's suggestions? Who looked at me with concern instead of trust? Meanwhile, I continued building my case. I filed official identity theft reports with the credit bureaus, placed fraud alerts, initiated disputes with each lender. I consulted a lawyer, not to sue, not yet, but to understand exposure. He told me something important. If I could demonstrate a fraudulent application with supporting digital evidence, the liability could shift entirely away from me. If you have proof of impersonation, he said, you protect yourself, but timing matters. If this escalates publicly, before you present documentation, reputational damage happens first. Reputational damage happens first. That sentence stayed with me. Amanda was moving socially. I needed to move structurally. The debt collectors increased their pressure. Phone calls began. At first, they were measured, then firmer. I documented every call. One afternoon while I was at work, they contacted my parents' landline. Amanda answered. Later that evening, my mother called me. "Michael, is there something we should know?" There it was again, that soft suspicion. "What did they say?" I asked. "That you owe significant amounts. That legal action may follow." Legal action. The word traveled faster than facts ever could. "I'm handling it," I said. "Under control." But this time, when I said it, I meant something different. Amanda texted me later that night. "Is everything okay?" "Mom's worried. You know you can tell me anything." I stared at the message for a long time. There was a version of me, months ago, who would have called her immediately, explained everything, asked for reassurance. Instead, I replied, "Everything is documented." 3 words. She didn't respond for hours. When she finally did, it was simple. "Okay." No emojis, no warmth. That was when I understood something else. She had assumed I was still operating emotionally. She didn't realize I had shifted into strategy. And the more she pressed socially, subtle comments to Claire, sympathetic conversations with my parents, the more I reduced my external reactions. Because reactions give people feedback, and I no longer wanted to teach her how to adjust. Silence, when chosen consciously, becomes unsettling to the person who expects you to explain yourself. By the time the wedding week approached, tension sat just beneath the surface of everything. Guests were arriving from out of town. Vendors were confirming final payments, and I knew something critical. The loans were about to enter formal collections, which meant escalation was no longer theoretical. It was imminent. I had 2 parallel tracks moving toward collision. Amanda's narrative and my evidence. I wasn't afraid of confrontation anymore. I was waiting for alignment. By the time wedding week arrived, everyone thought they knew the emotional temperature of the room. Excitement, mild stress. The usual chaos that comes with merging 2 families and coordinating 100 moving parts. What they didn't notice was that I had already stepped outside the emotion of it. While Amanda was organizing last-minute seating changes and Claire was finalizing vows, I was building something far quieter, a structure. First, I hired a forensic IT consultant, not to accuse anyone directly, but to analyze the metadata from the loan applications. IP addresses, device signatures, timestamps, cross-referenced against my known locations during those times. I knew how to read reports, but I wanted independent validation, someone whose credentials would hold weight if this escalated legally. The results came back within days. 2 applications were submitted from my parents' home IP address, one from a public Wi-Fi location 5 miles from Amanda's old apartment. All 3 during times when I had documented proof of being elsewhere, at work, badge swiped into the building, or out of state on a compliance conference. Hotel check-in receipts and panel schedules are archived. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was a pattern. Second, I retained an attorney formally, not a dramatic courtroom personality, a measured, detail-oriented specialist in identity fraud cases. I handed him everything, organized chronologically. He flipped through the binder slowly, occasionally nodding. "You've been preparing for this longer than most people realize," he said. "I had to be sure," I replied. He looked at me for a moment before asking the question that had been circling unspoken. "Do you know who did this?" I held his gaze. Yes. He didn't ask for the name. He didn't need to. Third, I secured my financial perimeter completely. New accounts, new passwords, multi-layer authentication tied to devices only in my possession. Credit freezes across all bureaus. Monitoring services upgraded. Not reactive, proactive. Meanwhile, socially, I maintained stillness. Amanda grew increasingly animated. I noticed how often she positioned herself near Claire during group events, how frequently she framed herself as the concerned older sister. "I just want to make sure you're protected," she told Claire one evening, not realizing I was within earshot. Protected from what? From me? The narrative was maturing. And then came the rehearsal dinner. It was elegant, intimate. 50 close friends and family members. Speeches, soft lighting, polished wood floors. Amanda requested to speak. She stood up with a glass of wine, smiling that effortless smile I had known my whole life. "To my little brother," she began, "the most responsible man I know. The one who always takes care of everyone, even when he doesn't take care of himself." Polite laughter. She paused. "I just hope he's learned that marriage means sharing everything, even the hard stuff." The room shifted slightly, not dramatically, but enough. Claire's smile tightened. My parents exchanged a look I couldn't quite decode. I stood when she finished, not to rebut, not to counter, just to thank everyone for coming. Short, controlled, no emotional reaction. Because here's what they never noticed. Every time Amanda spoke, she was committing to a version of events publicly. Every insinuation narrowed her future deniability. Every concerned remark created a timestamp. I wasn't just documenting financial fraud anymore. I was documenting narrative construction. And narrative inconsistency becomes powerful when facts surface. Late that night, after the dinner ended, I received an email from one of the lenders. Subject line, "Notice of intent to escalate. Collection proceedings." The timing wasn't accidental. Amanda had stopped making minimum payments weeks earlier. She knew escalation would happen near the wedding. Maximum visibility, maximum humiliation. That was the design. But what she didn't account for was this. I wasn't scrambling anymore. I was positioned. The forensic report was finalized. The legal filings were drafted. The evidence package was ready to be delivered simultaneously to lenders and, if necessary, to law enforcement. I didn't want spectacles. I wanted a sequence. And sequence requires patience. The night before the wedding, I sat alone in my apartment, looking at the binder on my desk. Not angry, not even sad, just aware that tomorrow, 2 things will happen. A public narrative would reach its peak, and then it would collide with documented truth, quietly, irreversibly. The wedding day began beautifully. Clear sky, soft light through the venue windows. The kind of calm weather people call a good omen. By noon, guests were arriving. Music rehearsals drifted faintly through the hallways. Claire was upstairs with her bridesmaids. Amanda moved through the venue as she owned it, coordinating, adjusting, whispering. I stayed mostly in the groom's suite, reviewing something far less romantic than vows. My attorney had sent a final confirmation email at 9:12 a.m. The fraud affidavits were ready to be submitted. The forensic report had not been notarized. The lenders were prepared to receive a consolidated evidence package. Once sent, the formal investigation process would begin. There was no drama in it, just attachments. At 1:47 p.m., while the wedding planner and I were finalizing payment with the venue manager, two men in business attire approached the table. They asked for me by my full name, polite, professional, but unmistakable. Collections agents. They referenced outstanding high-interest loans, totaling over $500,000, and stated that legal recovery actions were in motion. The venue manager stepped back immediately. The planner froze. This was the moment Amanda had engineered. Public, humiliating, disruptive. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply said, "I've been expecting you." That caught them off guard. I requested a private room. Within 10 minutes, my attorney joined via video call. I handed over printed copies of the forensic report, the IP trace analysis, the identity theft affidavit, and the timeline documentation. I watched their posture shift as they flipped through the pages. Badge access logs showing I was at work during application submissions. Conference registration records place me out of state. Device fingerprint mismatches. My attorney spoke calmly. These loans were fraudulently obtained. My client has filed formal disputes and will be cooperating fully with the investigation. Any attempt to pursue collection against him personally, after review of this evidence, will constitute negligent enforcement. There was no shouting, just recalibration. Within 30 minutes, the tone changed from accusatory to procedural. They left with copies, but the damage had already begun, because someone had seen them arrive, and someone had told someone else. By the time I stepped back into the main hall, whispers had started. I saw Amanda across the room. Her expression wasn't panicked. It was anticipation. She thought the narrative was unfolding exactly as she predicted. Claire appeared at the top of the staircase moments later, partially dressed, eyes searching the room. Someone had told her, I don't know who, maybe a well-meaning relative, maybe Amanda herself. She came down slowly, face pale. "Is it true?" she asked quietly. I didn't answer emotionally. I handed her the second binder, the one I had prepared for her. Inside were copies of everything, a cover letter explaining the timeline, screenshots of Amanda's IP address, copies of her casual text messages juxtaposed against application dates. Claire flipped through the first few pages, her breathing changed. She looked up at me, not with anger, with shock. "I didn't want to tell you until I could prove it," I said, because accusation without evidence would have sounded like deflection. Behind her, Amanda had stopped moving. She couldn't hear what we were saying, but she could see the binder. And for the first time that day, I saw something I hadn't seen in months. Uncertainty. The private reveal wasn't dramatic. There were no screams, just shifting gravity. Claire closed the binder slowly. "I need time," she said. And she walked away, not toward the aisle, not toward the guests, just away. The ceremony was postponed, officially due to unexpected circumstances, unofficially because the narrative had cracked open. Amanda tried to approach me later. I held up a hand gently. "Not here," I said. Because the reveal wasn't for spectacle, it was for the sequence, and the next step had to be chosen carefully. When Claire walked away from the staircase, she didn't slam the door. She didn't cry in front of anyone. She simply disappeared into one of the private bridal suites with her maid of honor. The music downstairs stopped shortly after. The planner began speaking in soft, controlled tones to guests. Champagne glasses were quietly collected. Amanda approached me about 15 minutes later. Her face carried the right expression, confusion layered over concern. "What is going on?" she asked. "Did you tell her?" "Not." "What did she see?" "Just carefully neutralize confusion." I looked at her for a long moment. There are moments in life where emotion tries to surge forward. Anger, betrayal, disbelief. But I felt none of it. What I felt was calculation. This was the decision point. I had options. Option 1, protect the family. Quietly resolve the fraud case. Frame it as external identity theft. Preserve Amanda's reputation. Cancel the wedding with vague explanations and absorb the reputational damage privately. Option 2, confront her publicly. Expose everything in front of our parents, the guests, and the extended relatives. Let the shock detonate in real time. Option 3, initiate formal legal proceedings without spectacle. Allow the documented evidence to move through the proper channels. Let consequences unfold through process, not performance. Each option had a cost. The first would protect everyone except me. The second would satisfy emotion, but create chaos I couldn't control. The third would be irreversible, because once a formal fraud investigation names a suspect, especially someone with documented digital linkage, there is no family meeting that can erase it. Amanda searched my face for a reaction. "You're scaring everyone," she said softly. "If you made a mistake, we can handle it. But dragging Claire into some paperwork drama on your wedding day, that was the final test." She was still refraining, still positioning herself as a mediator, as a helper. In that moment, I realized something that settled everything inside me. If I protected her now, she would do it again. Maybe not with loans, maybe not with me, but the pattern would continue, and I would be complicit. "I didn't make a mistake," I said calmly. "Then what is this?" she pressed. "This," I replied, "is documentation." Her jaw tightened slightly, barely visible, but there. Upstairs, nearly an hour later, Claire came down dressed, not in her wedding gown, but in a simple coat over her rehearsal dress. Her eyes were red but dry. She stood in front of me, measured. "I believe you," she said quietly. Not, "I understand." No, I'm sorry. "I believe you." It should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like a consequence. "Do you still want to get married today?" she asked. There it was. The second decision layered over the first. Because belief doesn't erase damage, she had doubted me. Even briefly. Enough to walk away. Enough to hesitate. And I understood why. Amanda's narrative had been consistent for months. My silence had created space for doubt. But trust, once cracked, doesn't reset on command. I looked around the venue. The guests are whispering. My parents are sitting rigidly at a corner table. Amanda was standing perfectly still, as if movement might trigger exposure. If we were married today, it would always be remembered as the wedding with the scandal. If we postponed quietly, the story would remain half told. If I pursued legal action, the truth would surface fully, but publicly. I turned back to Claire. "Not today," I said. Not because I didn't love her, but because marriage built on freshly fractured trust would always carry this day inside it. She nodded slowly. There were no dramatic tears, just acceptance. Then I made the irreversible choice. I texted my attorney. Proceed with full submission. All lenders. Immediate. 3 seconds later, the confirmation arrived. Understood. Initiating now. Across the room, Amanda's phone buzzed. She glanced at it reflexively, and I watched her expression change. Not fear, not yet, but the first tremor of something she hadn't accounted for. The sequence had begun. Once the message was sent to my attorney, everything shifted from anticipation to execution. There were no sirens, no dramatic confrontations, just emails, filings, timestamps. Within hours, formal fraud affidavits were submitted to all three lenders. The forensic IT report was attached in full, including IP trace data, device fingerprint inconsistencies, and submission timestamps cross-referenced with my verified physical locations. Simultaneously, my attorney filed a police report for identity theft, naming a primary suspect based strictly on documented evidence, not an accusation. Evidence. I didn't announce any of it. Downstairs, the wedding planner gently informed guests that the ceremony would be postponed due to personal matters. Some left quietly, some hugged Claire, some avoided eye contact with me entirely. Amanda stayed. That surprised me. She didn't storm out, she didn't collapse. She moved through the room, reassuring relatives, playing the concerned sister. This is so hard for him, I overheard her say. He doesn't handle pressure well. Pressure, the irony, almost made me smile. By early evening, most guests had gone. My parents approached me together. My mother's voice trembled slightly. Michael, is this about those letters? Yes, I said. Did you? My father couldn't finish the sentence. No, I replied calmly. I didn't elaborate, because an explanation at this stage would sound like a defense. The process was already moving. Around 7:30 p.m., Amanda's phone rang. She stepped outside to answer. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. The lenders, upon receiving the forensic documentation, had flagged the accounts internally for fraud investigation. Standard procedure required them to freeze collection activity pending review and to initiate contact with any secondary parties linked to the application trail, which meant they would begin calling the alternative contact numbers listed. The numbers Amanda had provided. She re-entered the venue 10 minutes later, face composed, but her movements were tighter now, controlled. She approached me directly for the first time since the staircase. What did you do? She asked, quietly. Her tone had changed. Less performance, more calculation. I responded. I said, to what? To what you started. Her jaw flexed. You're making this bigger than it needs to be, she said. That was revealing. Not, you're wrong. Not, you misunderstood. Bigger than it needs to be, meaning manageable, if contained. It was already big, I replied. You just assumed I'd carry it. She held my gaze for several seconds. Then, you don't understand the position I was in. I almost asked. Almost. But that would have shifted the frame to justification. Instead, I said, the investigation will determine everything. Investigation. The word landed differently than documentation. She stepped back. For the first time in months, she didn't have a quick response, because narrative doesn't survive forensic timelines. By the next morning, official notices were delivered to my parents' address, informing all listed parties of a pending fraud review and requesting formal statements. My parents read them at the kitchen table. Amanda was present. I wasn't. I was at my attorney's office, signing additional documentation to formalize my non-liability claim. Silence doesn't mean inactivity. It means movement without noise. Claire texted me that afternoon. I need space, but I know you didn't do this. It wasn't reconciliation, but it wasn't abandonment either. That mattered. Amanda attempted to call me 3 times that day. I didn't answer, because at this point, conversation would only complicate clarity. The process had begun. And once the process begins, personal persuasion loses power. Consequences don't arrive with dramatic music. They arrive in administrative envelopes. Within a week, formal investigation notices were sent to every address associated with the loan applications. That included my parents' home. That included Amanda's previous apartment. That included an email account she had listed as an alternate contact. The language was clinical: potential identity misrepresentation, digital submission irregularities, request for sworn statement. When systems move, they move impersonally. That's what made it irreversible. My parents called me the evening the second notice arrived. My father's voice was different, not angry, not accusatory, just strained. "They're asking your sister to provide a statement," he said quietly. "Yes," I replied. There was a long pause. "Michael," he continued, "is there something we don't know?" This was the moment I had anticipated. Not confrontation, recognition. "I submitted evidence," I said calmly. "Independent forensic analysis. It points to applications being filed from your home network and from locations tied to Amanda." Silence on the other end. My mother came onto the line. "She wouldn't do that," she said reflexively. Not because she knew the evidence, but because that version of her daughter didn't fit the story she'd carried for decades. "I didn't accuse," I replied. "I documented." Another pause. Then my father asked the question that shifted everything. "Does she know you filed?" "Yes." He exhaled slowly. That night, for the first time, Amanda called me without performance in her voice. No teasing tone, no layered concern, just directness. "You've put me in a situation I can't control," she said. The phrasing was precise. Not "you're wrong." Not "this is a misunderstanding, but I can't control this." "You were in control when you applied," I said evenly. She didn't deny it immediately. Instead, she tried something else. "I was going to fix it," she said. "I just needed more time." There it was. Not innocence. Intent to repair. After extraction. "By letting it explode at my wedding?" I asked. She didn't answer that. "I thought you'd handle it quietly," she said instead. "You always handle things." That sentence confirmed more than any document. She had calculated my personality into her risk assessment. "You always handle things." "You confused handling with absorbing," I replied. The line went silent. Over the next several days, the social consequences began surfacing. Mutual relatives started calling my parents, not me, asking careful questions. Some had heard fragments of the wedding disruption. Some had heard that financial issues were involved. Narratives were unstable now. Without my silence feeding one version, the story couldn't stabilize around blame. Claire and I met once, briefly, in a quiet cafe. No accusations, no drama. "I'm sorry I hesitated," she said softly. "I understand why you did," I replied. That was the truth. Amanda had been sowing doubt for months. I had chosen privacy over transparency. Both decisions had consequences. "We can't just go back," Claire said. I know. There was grief in that, but not hostility. Meanwhile, the lenders completed preliminary reviews. 2 accounts were formally frozen, pending a full fraud investigation. The collection activity against me was suspended. Documentation was working. Amanda's tone shifted from defensive to urgent. "You need to withdraw the complaint," she texted one night. "This is getting serious." It had always been serious. The difference was who felt it now. For the first time in our lives, instability wasn't landing on me. It was landing on her, and she had no fallback plan. Panic doesn't always look chaotic. Sometimes it looks organized. Amanda began calling relatives one by one, not to confess, to contextuals. She misunderstood something. It was a temporary arrangement. Michael overreacted legally instead of talking to me. The language shifted from denial to mitigation. But mitigation only works when facts are unclear. The lenders completed a deeper digital review within 3 weeks. Device fingerprint analysis tied 2 loan submissions to a laptop registered under Amanda's name. The public Wi-Fi application was traced through the login credentials she had used for a loyalty account at the cafe. It wasn't circumstantial anymore. It was technical. My attorney forwarded me the formal update letter. Based on preliminary findings, primary liability is being reassessed under identity misrepresentation statutes. Further inquiry pending sworn statements. Translation: They believed me. My parents asked to meet in person. We sat at their dining table, the same table where Amanda and I had done homework years ago. The notices were spread out between us. My mother looked smaller somehow. Not physically, just deflated. She admitted she used your information, my father said quietly. There it was. No theatrics, just a fact. She said she meant to pay everything back before you noticed. Before I noticed. As if the wrongdoing was measured by detection, not action. She thought you'd understand, my mother added. That sentence didn't sting the way it might have months ago, because now I understand something else. Understanding and enabling are dangerously close cousins. She also said, my father continued carefully, that she panicked when the payments fell behind. That's why she made those comments to Claire. Narrative insulation. Confirmed. My mother's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Can this be stopped? She asked. It wasn't a demand. It was hope. I held her gaze gently. No. The filings were submitted. Statements were recorded. Fraud investigations. Don't retract. Because a family meeting feels heavy. Amanda asked to see me alone that evening. I agreed. We met in the quiet park near our childhood home. No audience, no raised voices. She looked exhausted, not from guilt, but from loss of control. You've destroyed my life, she said flatly. No, I replied. I stopped you from using mine. She winced slightly at that. I was drowning, she said. Business failed. Credit cards maxed. No one would approve of me. I just needed leverage. Leverage. An interesting word. And you chose me, I said. You were safe, she answered automatically. Safe, reliable, absorbent. The role she had assigned me. I was going to fix it before it hurt you, she insisted. It already did, I said calmly. The wedding. That landed. She looked away. You could have talked to me, she said. I would have helped, I replied, if you had asked. She didn't argue that, because asking would have required vulnerability. Impersonation required entitlement. I need you to retract your statement, she said finally. They're talking about criminal charges. There it was. Not an apology. Consequence. I can't, I said. Won't, she corrected. I considered that. You're right, I said. I won't. Not out of revenge. Out of bounds. For the first time in my life, I wasn't cushioning the fall. She realized it then. This wasn't a temporary standoff. It was a structural collapse. And structures, once cracked at the foundation, don't reset because someone regrets the pressure. When she walked away that night, it wasn't dramatic. It was smaller than that. Quieter, like someone who had just realized the safety net was never a guarantee, just a pattern she had depended on. And patterns, once broken, don't resume automatically. The formal confrontation didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened in a conference room at my attorney's office. Neutral walls, fluorescent lighting, a long rectangular table that made everyone sit facing each other, whether they wanted to or not. Amanda arrived with her own lawyer. That detail alone told me everything had shifted, from emotional pleading to legal positioning. My parents were there too, not as defenders, not as accusers, just witnesses to the fracture. There were no raised voices, no dramatic accusations, Just documentation. My attorney laid out the timeline clearly. Loan applications were submitted over 8 months. IP addresses linked to my parents' residence. Device signatures match Amanda's registered laptop. Minimum payments are made from an account in her name for 3 consecutive months before stopping. Text messages sent by her on application dates asking me unrelated personal questions, likely to confirm security answers. Amanda's lawyer listened carefully, took notes, asked procedural questions. Then Amanda spoke. "I never intended permanent harm," she said evenly. "I plan to repay the balances once my business recovered." Intent. It's a word people reach for when outcomes look indefensible. "You submitted applications impersonating him," her lawyer clarified gently. "Correct?" A pause. "Yes." The word didn't echo, it just settled. My mother inhaled sharply. My father closed his eyes briefly. No one looked at me. They didn't need to. I wasn't triumphant. I wasn't vindicated in some cinematic way. I felt steady, Amanda continued. I panicked when the interest compounded. I thought if I kept payments going long enough, I could refinance everything under my name eventually. "And the comments at the wedding?" my attorney asked calmly. She hesitated. "I was scared he would expose me. I needed people to doubt him if something surfaced." There it was, stated plainly. Narrative engineering. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She simply acknowledged the strategy. And that clarity, oddly, made everything lighter, because for months I had carried the quiet tension of uncertainty. Now there was none. Facts remove ambiguity. The lenders had already signaled that they would pursue primary liability against her directly, pending final review. Criminal referral was possible, though outcomes would depend on restitution agreements and cooperation. Amanda's lawyer shifted the discussion toward resolution, structured repayment plans, negotiated settlements, and mitigation of charges. Adult consequences, administrative gravity. At one point, Amanda looked directly at me. "You could have warned me," she said. It wasn't angry. It was almost reflective. "I did," I replied. She frowned slightly. When I said everything was documented, she absorbed that. In the silence that followed, something subtle changed between us. For the first time in our lives, I wasn't reacting to her energy. She was adjusting to mine. When the meeting concluded, there were no dramatic exits, just signatures acknowledging receipt of evidence and the next procedural steps. Outside the building, my parents lingered. My mother approached me slowly. "I didn't see it," she said quietly. "I know," I replied. That was the truth. Patterns hide inside familiarity. As Amanda walked toward her car, she paused. Not to argue, not to apologize dramatically, just to say one sentence. "You're not who I thought you were." I considered that carefully. "No," I said. "I'm exactly who I've always been." The difference was that I had finally drawn a line around it. It's been 11 months since the wedding that didn't happen. The venue refunded part of the deposit. The rest was lost. Some guests still ask careful questions when they see me at family gatherings. Others avoid the topic entirely. Amanda entered into a structured repayment agreement with the lenders. Criminal charges were conditionally deferred pending compliance. It will take her years to rebuild her credit, years to untangle the damage. We speak occasionally, briefly, politely, but the dynamic is different now. There's no fallback assumption, no invisible safety net. As for Claire, we didn't reschedule the wedding, not because of the fraud itself, but because something fundamental had been revealed in both of us. She had doubted me when narrative pressure peaked. I had chosen documentation over immediate transparency. Neither of us was wrong, but trust doesn't reset just because evidence surfaces. We tried counseling. We talked honestly about fear, influence, and perception. In the end, we realized something uncomfortable. We loved each other, but we had both relied on the idea of who the other person was, rather than the full complexity of who we actually were under stress. We ended things quietly. No hostility, just truth. People sometimes expect me to sound bitter when I tell this story. I'm not. I lost a wedding. I lost a version of my relationship with my sister. I lost the illusion that being the reliable one guarantees loyalty. But I gained something more durable. Definition. I no longer allow steady to mean silent. I no longer confuse protecting others from discomfort with protecting myself. And I no longer let jokes linger when they're actually rehearsals for blame. At work, I was promoted again. Not because of this incident, but because the skills I use privately are the same ones I use professionally. Documentation, pattern recognition, controlled response. Personally, I'm different in quieter ways. When someone tests a boundary, I don't rationalize it. When someone asks if everything is under control, I answer more honestly. And when I feel that subtle pressure to absorb instability for the sake of peace, I pause. Because peace without boundaries is just a delayed collapse. Amanda once told me recently, "You've changed." She didn't say it as criticism. She said it as an observation. And she's right. I haven't become colder. I haven't become harsher. I've become defined. There's a difference. Before, I believed my strength was endurance. Now I understand its clarity. Endurance absorbs damage. Clarity prevents it. I don't hate my sister. I don't resent Claire. But I no longer accept roles assigned without my consent. And that, more than any legal outcome, is what shifted my life. If you've listened this far, you might be expecting a final dramatic twist. There isn't one. No courtroom victory speech, no public apology posted online, no cinematic reconciliation, just paperwork, distance, and redefinition. For most of my life, I believed being the stable one meant absorbing turbulence quietly. I thought strength was measured by how much you could carry without complaint. I thought loyalty meant protecting people from the consequences of their own decisions. I was wrong. Loyalty without boundaries becomes permission. Silence without clarity becomes vulnerability. And reliability without limits becomes exploitation. What happened to me wasn't just financial fraud. It was narrative manipulation. It was someone calculating my personality into their risk model, betting that I would prioritize family harmony over structural truth. For a long time, they were right, until they weren't. The most important shift in this entire story wasn't the forensic report. It wasn't the legal filing. It wasn't even the canceled wedding. It was the moment I realized that quiet does not have to mean passive. You can be calm and decisive. You can be measured and immovable. You can love someone and still refuse to shield them from consequences. That's not revenge. That's alignment. If there's one thing I would tell anyone who recognizes themselves in my role, the dependable one, the stable one, the he'll handle it person, it's this. Document the patterns. Say the uncomfortable sentence earlier. Define your limits before someone else defines them for you. I don't regret filing the complaint. I don't regret stopping the wedding. I regret only one thing: waiting so long to believe that my boundaries deserved the same protection I gave everyone else. So, I'll leave you with a question. If the people in your life see you as strong, have you ever considered whether they're also assuming you'll tolerate more than you should? I'd genuinely like to know your thoughts in the comments.